When I walked into class, the newspaper editor said, "Congrats on sleeping your way to that scholarship." She was holding the school paper with my photo on the front page and a headline that said, "Merit Scholar or Bedroom Scholar." Inside the real story of this year's full ride winner, and everyone in the lecture hall was staring at me. "What is this?" I grabbed the paper from Ashley, who was smiling like she'd won something. "It's journalism. The people deserve to know how you really got that scholarship over more qualified candidates." She said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "I got it because I had a 4.0 GPA and perfect test scores." But Ashley laughed and pointed to the article. "According to my sources, you've been spending a lot of time in Professor Coleman's office. Late-night study sessions, private tutoring, very private." The professor she was talking about was 70 years old and had been my advisor since freshman year because he ran the physics program. "He's my academic advisor. Everyone meets with their advisor." Ashley stood up so the whole room could see her. "Not everyone gets a $50,000 scholarship after those meetings. My investigation shows you were in his office for 3 hours last Tuesday." "What were you doing for 3 hours?" I felt sick because I knew exactly what I was doing. I was going over my scholarship application with him, like he did for all his advisees, but Ashley had twisted it into something disgusting. "You're lying. This is defamation." Ashley pulled out her phone and showed me photos of me entering and leaving Professor Coleman's office at different times. "I have proof. Multiple visits, sometimes staying past normal office hours. The scholarship committee needs to know about this conflict of interest." She'd been stalking me, taking photos and writing down times like some private investigator. Everyone visits their advisors. That's literally their job. But Ashley was already posting the article on the school's social media pages. The difference is you won, and I didn't. Despite my father donating $2 million to this school, despite my family name being on the library, despite me having connections to every board member, nobody from nowhere got the scholarship, and I want to know why. There it was. She was mad because for once her money hadn't bought her something she wanted. Maybe because I studied while you partied. Maybe because I worked 2 jobs while you went on vacation. Maybe because I actually earned it. Ashley's face got red. "Nobody earns anything over me. My family built this school. My grandfather was dean. My mother is on the board. That scholarship belonged to me, and you stole it by doing things I would never lower myself to do." She said it with such disgust, like sleeping with a professor was beneath her, but destroying someone's reputation wasn't. "You have no proof because nothing happened." I tried to leave, but she blocked my way. "I have all the proof I need. Late-night visits, closed-door meetings, you getting the scholarship over me. People can connect the dots." She'd already destroyed my reputation with no evidence except her jealousy and entitlement. "Professor Coleman is married with grandchildren. He's been teaching for 40 years without a single complaint." But Ashley just smiled. "Which makes it even more shocking that he'd risk it all for you. Must have been quite the temptation." She was implying I'd seduced a grandfather, and the worst part was people were starting to believe it. By lunch, the story was everywhere. People whispered when I walked by. My roommate asked if it was true. My parents called crying, asking what was happening. Professor Coleman was called into the dean's office for questioning. His wife of 45 years had to hear rumors about her husband and a student. The scholarship committee announced they were reviewing my application. Ashley posted updates every hour about the developing scandal, adding more lies each time. She said she'd found witnesses who saw inappropriate contact. She said other professors were coming forward with concerns. She said my grades might have been inflated. All lies, but once they were out there, people believed them. Professor Coleman tried to defend me, but Ashley wrote that he was just protecting his victim to save his career. The investigation took 2 weeks. 2 weeks of walking through campus with everyone staring. 2 weeks of Ashley posting new accusations. 2 weeks of Professor Coleman's reputation being destroyed. When the investigation found no evidence of any inappropriate relationship, Ashley just said they were covering it up to protect the school's reputation. That's when I learned something interesting from another student. Ashley had applied for the scholarship with an essay she didn't write. Her father had paid someone to write it for her. The same person had written essays for dozens of rich kids and kept copies of everything. I met with him and he showed me the original essay he'd written for Ashley, plus the emails where her father negotiated the price. $5,000 for one essay. He also had essays he'd written for her throughout college. Every single paper she'd ever turned in. Her entire academic career was fraud. I didn't put it on social media or in the newspaper. I went straight to the dean with the evidence. His secretary looked up from her computer and told me he was in a meeting, but I said it was urgent and about the scholarship investigation. She picked up her phone and spoke quietly, then nodded toward his office door. I walked in carrying the folder with everything Travis had given me, and Williamson was sitting behind his desk looking tired. He gestured to the chair across from him and asked what this was about. I opened the folder and spread out the papers on his desk. The original essay Ashley had submitted for the scholarship application, the identical essay Travis had written with his notes. An edit still visible in the margins, and the email chain between Ashley's father and Travis, negotiating the $5,000 payment. Williamson leaned forward and picked up the first page, his eyes moving across the text while his expression changed from polite attention to something harder. He set down the essay and picked up the emails, reading through each one carefully while I sat there with my hands folded in my lap trying not to shake. He looked up at me and asked where I got these documents. I explained about meeting Travis, how he'd kept copies of everything he'd written for wealthy students over the years, how he'd shown me proof that Ashley's entire academic career was built on purchased essays. Williamson picked up his phone and told his secretary to hold all his calls. Then he started reading through the documents again more slowly this time. He asked if I understood what I was bringing him, if I knew the serious nature of these accusations. I told him I understood perfectly, that Ashley had spent 2 weeks destroying my reputation, and Professor Coleman's reputation with lies, while her own scholarship application was complete fraud. Williamson set down the papers and looked at me for a long moment before saying he needed to verify everything before taking any action. He asked me to wait outside while he made some calls. I sat in the hallway outside his office watching students walk past to their normal classes while my hands wouldn't stop shaking. A girl from my physics lab glanced at me and quickly looked away, and I wondered if she'd read Ashley's article or believed the rumors. My phone buzzed with a text from Kamala asking how it was going. I typed back that I didn't know yet, but at least someone with authority was finally seeing the truth about Ashley's academic dishonesty. Kamala sent back 3 thumbs-up emojis and told me to text her as soon as I knew anything. I stared at the closed office door and tried to hear what Williamson was saying, but the walls were too thick. 20 minutes passed, then 30, then 40. Students kept walking by, and some of them stared at me sitting there alone in the hallway outside the dean's office. I checked my phone again, but there were no new messages. The secretary typed at her computer and answered phone calls without looking at me. Finally, the door opened, and Williamson asked me to come back in. There was another woman in the office now, tall with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. Williamson introduced her as Ingrid Melton from the University Council's office. She shook my hand with a firm grip and gestured for me to sit down. Williamson explained they needed to verify the documents with Travis before taking any action. I gave them his phone number and the address of the coffee shop where we'd met, feeling both hopeful that they were taking this seriously and worried that Ashley's family connections might still protect her from real consequences. Melton wrote down everything in a leather notebook and asked detailed questions about my conversation with Travis, when we met, what he'd told me, whether anyone else knew about the evidence. I answered everything honestly while Williamson listened and took his own notes. Melton asked if I'd made copies of the documents, and I said no, that these were the only copies Travis had given me. She nodded and said that was good, that they needed to control the information until they could verify everything. Williamson thanked me for bringing this forward and said they would be in touch soon. I stood up to leave, and he added that I should not discuss this with anyone, including Ashley, until their investigation was complete. I promised I wouldn't say anything and walked out of the office feeling like maybe things were finally moving in the right direction. That evening, I was sitting at my desk trying to focus on homework when Kamala burst into our room and told me to check Ashley's social media. I opened my laptop and saw she'd posted another update claiming the investigation into Professor Coleman was ongoing despite the findings. She'd added quotes from anonymous students about other concerning behavior they'd allegedly witnessed. I wanted to scream at my laptop that she was still lying while I was trying to follow proper procedures and do everything the right way. Kamala leaned over my shoulder reading the post and said Ashley was desperate. I closed my laptop and told Kamala about meeting with Williamson and Melton, about handing over all the evidence of Ashley's purchased essays. Kamala sat down on her bed and said the dean had the proof now, and institutions took time to act. I knew she was right, but it was hard to watch Ashley keep spreading lies while I had to stay quiet and trust the process. My phone buzzed with notifications from people tagging me in Ashley's post, asking if I had any comment. I turned off my notifications and tried to get back to my physics homework, but the equations blurred together on the page. The next morning, I walked into my lecture hall and immediately heard whispers. Students were clustered in small groups talking in low voices, and when I passed them, they got quiet. I sat down in my usual seat and pulled out my notebook, trying to look like I wasn't listening. The girl next to me leaned over and asked if I'd heard that Ashley got called to the dean's office. I said I hadn't heard anything and focused on my notes. More students came in and the whispers got louder. Someone said Ashley had been in Williamson's office for over an hour. Someone else said it was about the newspaper article. A guy in the back row said his roommate worked in the admin building and saw Ashley leaving with her father and some lawyers. I kept my head down and took notes when the professor started lecturing, trying to focus on my actual coursework that had suffered during these 2 weeks of dealing with Ashley's lies. But I couldn't stop thinking about what was happening in Williamson's office, whether they'd verified everything with Travis, whether Ashley's father's money and connections would somehow make the evidence disappear. Professor Coleman approached me after class ended and everyone else had left. He said the investigation officially cleared him yesterday. His voice sounded tired rather than relieved, like clearing his name hadn't erased the damage Ashley's accusations had caused. He mentioned his wife hadn't been sleeping well since the rumors started. She'd been getting looks at the grocery store, and someone had even asked her directly about the allegations. Coleman said he was considering early retirement even though he loved teaching, that maybe it was time to step away before something else happened. I felt the weight of how Ashley's lies had damaged an innocent man's final years of his career. He'd spent 40 years building his reputation, and she'd nearly destroyed it in 2 weeks with nothing but jealousy and fabricated evidence. I told him I was sorry for everything he'd been through because of the scholarship. He shook his head and said I had nothing to apologize for, that Ashley's actions weren't my fault. But I still felt responsible somehow, like winning the scholarship had triggered all of this damage to people who didn't deserve it. That afternoon, I was walking back to my dorm when my phone buzzed with an email from the scholarship committee. I stopped on the sidewalk and opened it with shaking hands. The email confirmed my award was secure based on the investigation findings. They apologized for any stress the review process had caused and assured me that my academic record and qualifications had always been exemplary. I read it 3 times to make sure I understood correctly. The relief I felt was complicated by knowing that people on campus still believed Ashley's version of events. The investigation clearing me and Professor Coleman didn't erase the rumors or make people forget the headlines Ashley had written. Kamala met me outside the dining hall and I showed her the email. She grabbed my arm and said we were celebrating with pizza. We got a table in the corner and she ordered a large pepperoni, talking about how justice had finally won. But I couldn't stop thinking about the students who still whispered when I walked past them in the hallways, the ones who would always wonder if there was some truth to Ashley's accusations, even though the investigation found nothing. 2 days later, Landon from the student newspaper messaged me asking if I'd comment on rumors that Ashley was under investigation for academic integrity violations. I stared at my phone trying to decide what to say. Part of me wanted everyone to know the truth about her purchased essays and her complete academic fraud. But another part of me didn't want to sink to Ashley's level of making public accusations before there were official findings. I typed back that he should wait for official announcements from the university administration. Landon responded asking if I could at least confirm whether I'd provided evidence to the dean's office. I told him I couldn't comment on ongoing investigations. He sent back a thumbs up and said he understood, that he was just trying to get the full story. I appreciated that he was actually asking me for my side, instead of just publishing whatever he wanted like Ashley had done. Ashley's social media went quiet for the first time in 2 weeks. No updates about the investigation, no new accusations, no posts at all. The sudden silence felt strange and kind of scary rather than peaceful. Kamala came over to my desk where I was refreshing Ashley's profile page for the 10th time. She asked what I was doing and I said I didn't know, that the quiet felt wrong somehow. Kamala sat on my bed and said Ashley was probably dealing with her own investigation now. We talked about what might be happening behind closed doors, whether her father had hired lawyers, whether the university would actually hold her accountable, or quietly sweep everything away to avoid embarrassing a major donor's family. Kamala thought they'd have to do something because the evidence was so clear. I wasn't sure, having learned that wealth and connections could protect people from consequences they deserved. We stayed up late talking through different scenarios, trying to guess what would happen next. I attended my regular meeting with Professor Coleman to discuss my graduate school applications. We sat in his office and he pulled up the list of programs I was interested in, asking questions about my research interests and career goals. We both pretended everything was normal, even though nothing felt normal anymore. He was professional and helpful as always, going through each program's requirements and helping me identify professors whose work aligned with mine. But I noticed his hands shook slightly when he signed my recommendation letter. The stress of the false accusations had taken a physical toll on this elderly man who only tried to help students succeed. He handed me the sealed envelope and told me I'd make an excellent graduate student at any of these programs. I thanked him and left his office feeling grateful for his support, but also guilty that my scholarship had somehow led to him being questioned and investigated and stressed to the point where his hands shook when he wrote. The next morning, I opened my laptop to find an email from the university administration with the subject line, Academic Integrity Reminder. My stomach dropped before I even clicked it, because I wondered if somehow this was about me again, if Ashley had found some new way to twist things. But when I opened it, the message was generic, addressed to all students, reminding everyone about plagiarism policies and the serious consequences of academic fraud. The email talked about how the university valued honest work and how cheating undermined everything a degree was supposed to represent. It didn't mention Ashley by name, but students weren't stupid. Within an hour, my dorm was buzzing with people connecting the dots. I heard conversations in the hallway about how someone must have gotten caught buying essays. My roommate came in and asked if I'd seen the email, and I nodded. She said everyone was talking about how it had to be related to Ashley because of the timing, right after she'd spent weeks accusing me of sleeping my way to a scholarship. I listened to people speculate about whether her father's $2 million donation would protect her from getting expelled. Some students thought money always won. Others said the evidence must be really solid if the university was sending out campus-wide reminders. I wanted to tell them I'd seen the evidence myself, that I'd held the emails where her father negotiated paying $5,000 for a single essay, but I kept quiet. I'd learned that talking made things worse and that proper channels took time to work. Kamala texted me during lunch asking if I was in the dining hall. I told her I was studying in my room because I didn't feel like dealing with more stares and whispers. She wrote back saying she'd just seen Ashley and I needed to hear about it. I called her and she described how Ashley had been sitting with her usual friend group, but something was different. The other girls were keeping physical distance, not leaning in close the way they normally did. Ashley's face looked angry and scared at the same time, like she was trying to maintain control, but knew she was losing it. Kamala said Ashley kept checking her phone and her hands were shaking when she picked up her water glass. Her friends weren't really talking to her, just giving short answers when she asked them questions. It was like watching someone realize their social power was disappearing. I felt this weird mix of emotions hearing about it. Part of me was satisfied that she was finally facing consequences for destroying my reputation and Professor Coleman's life with her lies. But another part of me felt uncomfortable taking pleasure in watching someone else suffer, even someone who'd tried to ruin my future out of pure jealousy and entitlement. I told Kamala I didn't know how to feel about it, and she said that was normal, that Ashley had done terrible things, but it was still hard to watch someone fall apart. We talked about how Ashley's whole identity was built on being untouchable because of her family's money and connections, and now that protection was cracking. 3 days later, I found a cream-colored envelope slipped under my door. My name was written in careful handwriting across the front. I opened it and pulled out a note card with flowers printed on the border. The message inside made my hands shake as I read it. Mrs. Coleman had written to thank me for coming forward with the truth about Ashley's academic fraud. She said she knew the past few weeks had been horrible for me and for her husband, that hearing rumors about him and a student had been the worst experience of their 45-year marriage. But she wanted me to know she'd never doubted him for a second, and she was grateful I'd had the courage to expose Ashley's lies by presenting real evidence to the dean. She wrote that her husband's reputation would recover because he'd spent 40 years building trust with students through genuine dedication to teaching. The note ended with her saying she hoped I would continue my studies without letting Ashley's jealous attack hold me back from the bright future I deserved. I sat on my bed and cried holding that note. It was the first time anyone had directly acknowledged that what I did mattered beyond just protecting myself. Mrs. Coleman understood that speaking up had helped clear an innocent person's name, that it was bigger than just my scholarship or my reputation. Her husband had been dragged through an investigation at 70 years old, forced to defend himself against disgusting accusations, and his wife had to hear strangers whisper about her marriage. But they both recognized that I'd done the right thing by collecting evidence and going through proper channels instead of staying silent or fighting back on social media like Ashley would have done. I kept that note in my desk drawer and looked at it whenever I felt overwhelmed by everything that had happened. The university council's office called me in on Thursday morning. Ingrid Melton introduced herself and explained she was handling the investigation into Ashley's academic integrity violations. She asked me to provide a formal statement about how I'd obtained the evidence from Travis. I sat in her office and walked through the entire timeline. I explained how another student had told me about Travis writing essays for rich kids. I described meeting him at the coffee shop and how he'd shown me the original essay he wrote for Ashley's scholarship application. I talked about the email chain where Ashley's father negotiated the $5,000 price. Ingrid took notes and asked specific questions about dates and times. She wanted to know if Travis had volunteered the information or if I'd pressured him in any way. I told her the truth, that he'd been angry about wealthy students using his work and then acting superior, that he'd kept copies of everything as insurance. She asked why I'd brought the evidence to the dean instead of posting it online or going to the student newspaper. I explained that I'd watched Ashley destroy reputations through social media, and I didn't want to be like her, that I believed the university should handle academic fraud through official procedures. Ingrid nodded and said I'd followed the appropriate steps. She told me that bringing documentation to administration was exactly what students should do, rather than making public accusations without giving people a chance to respond. Her words made me feel vindicated because I'd spent weeks wondering if I should have fought back harder or faster, if going through proper channels was too slow when Ashley was posting new lies every day. That evening, I was scrolling through social media when the student newspaper posted a new article. The headline said, "Academic Integrity Investigation Ongoing for Student Journalist." The article was careful not to name Ashley directly, but it talked about an investigation involving a student who worked for the campus newspaper and who had recently published controversial stories. It mentioned that the investigation concerned possible violations of the university's plagiarism and fraud policies. The article noted that the students' previous reporting was re-examined in light of questions about their own academic honesty. Within minutes, the comments section exploded. Students were posting about how hypocritical it was for someone to accuse others of cheating while buying their own essays. People were sharing screenshots of Ashley's article about me and asking whether someone who committed academic fraud could be trusted to report honestly about anything. I watched the social media tide slowly turn as students questioned everything Ashley had written about me and Professor Coleman. Some comments pointed out that she'd never provided real evidence, just photos of me entering an advisor's office and speculation based on jealousy. Others noted that the investigation had cleared both me and Professor Coleman, but Ashley had kept posting accusations anyway. The shift felt surreal after weeks of being the one everyone whispered about. Now people were dissecting Ashley's credibility and motivations, connecting her attack on me to her own fraudulent academic career. The scholarship committee sent me an email on Friday asking me to meet with them the following Monday. My heart stopped when I saw it. The email said they wanted to discuss the impact of recent events on my academic performance this semester. I immediately panicked that they were reconsidering the award despite their earlier confirmation that the investigation had cleared me. I called Kamala and she came over to find me staring at my laptop screen. I showed her the email and said I couldn't believe they were questioning the scholarship again after everything I'd been through. Kamala read it twice and said I was probably misinterpreting it. She thought they wanted to offer support, not take anything away. But I couldn't shake the fear that Ashley's lies had done permanent damage, that even with evidence of her fraud, people still doubted my merit. Kamala sat with me and helped me write a response confirming I'd attend the meeting. She made me promise to go in and explain honestly how the stress had affected my ability to focus on coursework. She reminded me that I'd done nothing wrong and the committee knew that, and they probably just wanted to understand what I'd been dealing with while false accusations spread across campus. Monday afternoon, I walked into the scholarship committee meeting room with my stomach in knots. 5 committee members sat around a table and the chair asked me to sit down. I expected them to start questioning my qualifications or asking about my relationship with Professor Coleman again. Instead, the chair said they wanted to express concern about the toll the defamation had taken on my well-being. They asked how I was managing my coursework given the stress of having my reputation attacked publicly. I was so surprised I didn't know what to say at first. Then I explained honestly that the past few weeks had been the hardest of my life. I talked about walking through campus with everyone staring, about my parents calling in tears, about struggling to concentrate in class when people were whispering that I'd slept with my advisor. I described how difficult it was to study for exams while Ashley posted new accusations every few hours. The committee members listened and several of them looked genuinely upset. One woman said she was appalled that another student would weaponize false accusations to challenge a legitimate merit award. Another member said they'd reviewed my application again, and my qualifications were outstanding, that I'd earned the scholarship through hard work and academic excellence. The chair explained they were offering resources like academic counseling and deadline extensions if I needed them. They made it clear the scholarship was secure, and nothing about my award was in question. The meeting that I'd dreaded turned out to be supportive instead of accusatory. For the first time, I felt like the institution recognized I'd been wronged, that they understood Ashley's attack had been motivated by jealousy and entitlement, rather than any legitimate concern. 2 days later, Kamala grabbed my arm while we were walking to class. She pointed toward the administration building where a man in an expensive dark suit was getting out of a black car. 2 people in business clothes followed him carrying briefcases. Kamala whispered that had to be Ashley's father because who else would show up with lawyers? We watched them walk into the building, and Kamala joked that money couldn't buy integrity, but it could definitely buy legal representation. We went to the library after class and positioned ourselves by the windows that faced the administration building. The meeting stretched past 2 hours. Students walking by kept stopping to look and speculate about what was happening inside. Some people thought Ashley's father was threatening to pull his donations if the university didn't drop the investigation. Others figured he was trying to negotiate a lesser punishment. I wondered if he even realized how much evidence there was, if he knew Travis had kept copies of every email about the $5,000 essay payment. Kamala said rich people always thought they could make problems disappear with money and lawyers, but this time the evidence was too clear. We finally left the library when it got dark, but the meeting was still going. Landon sent me a message that evening asking if I'd provide background on the scholarship controversy now that Ashley's credibility was questioned publicly. I stared at his message for a long time, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to stay silent and let everything play out through official channels, but another part thought other students deserved to understand what really happened, that telling my side to a legitimate journalist was different from Ashley's social media smear campaign. I talked it over with Kamala, and she said Landon had always been fair in his reporting, that he'd tried to get both sides of stories, unlike Ashley, who just posted whatever made her look good. I messaged back agreeing to meet him at a coffee shop off campus. I figured sitting down with an actual journalist who would fact-check and verify everything was the right way to tell my story, that it would help people understand the difference between real journalism and the hit piece Ashley had published without even giving me a chance to respond. Saturday afternoon, I met Landon at the coffee shop 2 blocks from campus. He had a notebook and recorder, and he asked if I minded him recording our conversation. I said that was fine because I had nothing to hide. Landon started by asking me to walk through the timeline from when I won the scholarship to when Ashley published her article. I explained about my GPA and test scores, about how I'd worked 2 jobs while maintaining perfect grades. I described my relationship with Professor Coleman as my academic advisor, how he'd helped me with my scholarship application the same way he helped all his advisees. Landon asked about the photos Ashley had taken, and I explained that visiting your advisor's office was completely normal, that the 3-hour meeting she'd made sound suspicious was just us going through my application materials. I talked about how Ashley's jealousy over losing the scholarship had led her to fabricate a scandal based on nothing but her entitlement and belief that her family's money should guarantee her everything. Landon took careful notes and asked follow-up questions about specific details. He wanted to know about the investigation and how it had affected Professor Coleman. He asked about the evidence I'd found regarding Ashley's academic fraud. I answered everything honestly and stuck to facts rather than emotions. When we finished, Landon promised to verify everything before publishing. He said he'd talk to the scholarship committee and get Professor Coleman's official statement from the investigation. He explained that real journalism meant checking sources and giving everyone a chance to respond, which was exactly what Ashley hadn't done when she ran her hit piece accusing me of things that never happened. I walked to Professor Coleman's office during his posted hours 3 days after the dean accepted my evidence. The hallway was empty and quiet, and I knocked on his doorframe even though the door stood open. He looked up from grading papers and waved me inside with a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. I sat in the chair across from his desk and started to apologize for all the trouble my scholarship had caused him, for the investigation, for the whispers about his marriage, for everything. He held up his hand to stop me before I could finish. He told me I had nothing to apologize for because I hadn't done anything wrong, and neither had he. His voice was firm but kind, like he was trying to convince both of us. He explained that Ashley's campaign had actually revealed serious problems with how the university handled accusations, that administrators were now discussing new policies to protect students and faculty from defamation without evidence. The changes would require formal procedures before publishing accusations, mandatory fact-checking, and consequences for false claims made through official campus channels. He said something positive might come from this nightmare. Future students and professors wouldn't have to endure what we went through because someone decided to weaponize journalism for personal revenge. I felt some of the guilt lift off my chest, replaced by cautious hope that the damage might lead to actual improvements. The Academic Integrity Board scheduled Ashley's formal hearing for 2 weeks out, and the news spread across campus faster than her original article about me. Students whispered in the dining hall about whether she'd be expelled, whether her father's donations would save her, whether the evidence was really as bad as people claimed. I heard someone say her whole academic career was fake. She'd never written a single paper herself, that everything was purchased with her family's money. Kamala found me in our dorm room staring at my physics textbook without actually reading it, and I told her I felt vindicated, but also completely exhausted. The stress of defending myself for weeks had drained something from me that I couldn't quite name. She sat next to me on my bed and asked what I needed, and I said I just wanted it to be over, so I could focus on actual studying, instead of constantly defending my character and reputation. She squeezed my hand and reminded me that the truth was finally coming out. People were seeing Ashley for who she really was. Soon I could go back to being just another student instead of the center of campus drama. But the waiting felt harder than the fighting had been, like holding my breath underwater and not knowing when I'd be allowed to surface. Travis called me 4 days before Ashley's hearing, his voice shaking slightly as he explained that the university had verified all his documents and asked him to testify. He said he was nervous about getting involved in something this public, that he'd kept his ghostwriting business quiet for obvious reasons, that coming forward meant exposing himself to potential consequences too. But then his voice got harder, and he said he was also angry that wealthy students like Ashley exploited people like him. And then acted superior. That she'd probably never even read the essays he wrote for her. That she looked down on him while building her entire academic reputation on his words. I thanked him for keeping such detailed records, for saving the emails and original documents, for being willing to testify despite his fears. He told me he'd seen too many rich kids cheat their way through college while working students struggled to afford textbooks, and he was tired of watching privilege win every time. The call left me feeling grateful and a little guilty that proving Ashley's fraud meant dragging Travis into the spotlight. But he'd made his choice, and I had to trust that he understood the risks and decided the truth mattered more than his comfort. Ashley made one final social media post the night before her hearing, claiming she was the victim of a conspiracy to silence her journalism and protect corrupt professors. She wrote that powerful people were trying to destroy her credibility because she'd exposed uncomfortable truths, that the plagiarism allegations were fabricated to discredit her investigation, that she was punished for doing real journalism that challenged the establishment. The post was long and dramatic, full of phrases about truth-tellers being persecuted and whistleblowers facing retaliation. But the comments section told a different story. People asked about the evidence of purchased essays, questioned why she hadn't mentioned Travis or the documents during her original investigation, pointed out that real journalists fact-check their sources instead of posting accusations based on jealousy. Someone wrote that being rich doesn't make you a victim when you're caught cheating, and the comment got hundreds of likes. I didn't engage or respond to any of it, having learned that dignified silence and proper procedures were more effective than public arguments. I watched her credibility crumble under the weight of documented evidence, while I focused on preparing for my own finals and maintaining the GPA that had earned me the scholarship in the first place. The student newspaper published Landon's article about the scholarship controversy the same morning as Ashley's hearing. The piece included quotes from me about my academic record and relationship with Professor Coleman, statements from the scholarship committee explaining their selection process, and Professor Coleman's official statement from the investigation that had cleared both of us. Landon had interviewed students who worked with Professor Coleman and confirmed his reputation for helping all advisees equally, and he'd gotten comments from the dean's office about the importance of merit-based awards. The article presented a clear timeline of events, from my winning the scholarship to Ashley's baseless accusations to the investigation that found no evidence of wrongdoing. It made clear that Ashley's claims had been motivated by jealousy and entitlement, rather than actual concerns about ethics or fairness. Reading it felt like watching the truth finally reach people who'd only heard Ashley's lies, like legitimate journalism was correcting the damage her hit piece had done. Students stopped me between classes to say they'd read the article, that they understood what really happened, that they were sorry for believing rumors without evidence. The vindication felt good, but also highlighted how much damage false accusations could do before truth caught up. Students I didn't know started approaching me in the dining hall and library over the next few days, saying they were sorry they believed the rumors and congratulating me on the scholarship. A girl from my chemistry class told me she'd defended me when people gossiped, but nobody listened, and now she felt validated that the truth came out. A guy I'd never spoken to said he'd lost a scholarship to a wealthy student who probably cheated, and seeing Ashley face consequences gave him hope that merit might actually matter sometimes. The support felt good and genuine, and I tried to accept it graciously, even though part of me wanted to ask where these people were when everyone believed Ashley's lies. But I realized this experience had taught me hard lessons about reputation and privilege, about how easily truth can be distorted by someone with a platform and malicious intent. People wanted to believe the scandal because it was interesting, because it fit their assumptions about how the world worked, because Ashley had money and confidence and a newspaper to spread her version of events. Fighting back required patience and evidence and faith that proper procedures would eventually work, even when it felt like the system was too slow or too willing to believe the worst about people without power. Professor Coleman made an announcement in his lecture hall 3 days after Ashley's hearing, telling the packed room that he'd decided not to retire after all. His voice was steady as he explained that backing down would send the wrong message to students about standing up to false accusations, that he'd spent 40 years building relationships based on trust and integrity, that he refused to let lies end his career early. The room erupted in applause, and I felt tears burning in my eyes because I knew my coming forward with evidence about Ashley had helped him feel vindicated enough to continue teaching. He'd faced horrible accusations about his character and marriage, had endured an investigation that questioned his entire career, had watched his wife suffer from rumors that could have destroyed their family. But he'd been cleared, and now he was choosing to stay, to keep helping students, to prove that truth and integrity could survive attacks from people who'd never earned anything honestly. After class, he caught my eye and I nodded back, and nothing else needed to be said between us. The academic integrity hearing took place behind closed doors in the administration building, but Landon's sources told him the board was reviewing evidence of at least 15 essays Ashley purchased over 3 years. I sat in the library when he texted me the update, my physics homework forgotten as I processed the scale of her fraud. 15 essays meant 15 classes where she'd submitted someone else's work, 15 grades she hadn't earned, 15 times she'd lied and cheated while looking down on students who actually studied. Her outrage over me winning the scholarship became even more absurd when I realized she'd never earned anything through actual merit, that her entire academic career was built on her father's money and her willingness to commit fraud. She'd called me unqualified while submitting purchased essays in every class. She'd claimed I didn't deserve the scholarship while cheating her way through college. The hypocrisy was staggering, and I felt a grim satisfaction that the evidence was so overwhelming that even her family's donations and connections couldn't make it disappear. Kamala and I studied together in the library that evening, spreading our textbooks and notes across a table in the quiet section. For the first time in weeks, I could actually focus on my physics homework, without my mind spiraling to worst-case scenarios about investigations and accusations and public humiliation. The equations made sense again, the problems felt manageable, and I worked through problem sets with the concentration I'd lost during Ashley's campaign. Kamala looked up from her chemistry notes and smiled at me, and I smiled back, and the normalcy felt precious and hard-won. She'd been there through everything, listening when I needed to vent, reminding me to eat when stress killed my appetite, walking with me across campus when I didn't want to face the stairs alone. Other people had kept their distance to avoid being associated with the scandal, but she'd never wavered, and I knew that kind of friendship was worth more than any scholarship or vindication. I received an email from Ingrid Melton at the University Council's office the next morning, thanking me for bringing the academic fraud to their attention and noting that my actions had upheld the integrity of the scholarship program. She wrote that following proper procedures by presenting evidence to administration, rather than retaliating publicly, had demonstrated the kind of character and judgment the university valued in scholarship recipients. The formal acknowledgement that I'd done the right thing made me feel proud of how I'd handled an impossible situation, even when it would have been easier to fight dirty like Ashley did. I could have posted Travis's evidence on social media, could have created my own scandal, could have destroyed her reputation the way she'd tried to destroy mine. But I'd trusted the system and followed the rules and let documented evidence speak for itself, and now the institution was recognizing that choice. The email felt like official validation that patience and integrity mattered more than immediate revenge, that some battles were worth fighting properly even when the proper way felt slow and frustrating and inadequate. The Academic Integrity Board announced their decision 3 days after the hearing ended. I was in the library when Kamala texted me a screenshot of the official campus announcement posted on the university website. Ashley had been found responsible for extensive academic dishonesty, including purchasing at least 15 essays over 3 years and submitting them as her own work. The recommended sanction was expulsion and revocation of all credits earned through fraudulent work. My hands shook as I read the announcement again, making sure I understood what it meant. She was kicked out. Everything she'd submitted for grades during her entire time at this university was erased. The scholarship she thought belonged to her by birthright would never be hers, because she'd never actually earned a single credit through honest work. Students started gathering in clusters across campus within an hour of the announcement, their voices carrying across the quad as they discussed what had happened. I heard fragments of conversations as I walked to my dorm. Someone said they'd always suspected Ashley cheated but were too scared to report it. Another person mentioned how her father's donations wouldn't save her this time. A group near the student center was pulling up her old articles on their phones and reading them with new understanding about her hypocrisy. The girl who'd accused me of sleeping my way to success had built her entire academic career on daddy's money and purchased essays. I felt relief washing over me because the truth was finally public and undeniable. But I also felt sad that it had come to this, that someone had thrown away their education and destroyed their reputation out of jealousy and entitlement. She could have just accepted that sometimes other people earn things through merit and moved on with her privileged life. Instead, she'd chosen to attack me with lies and ended up exposing her own fraud. Ashley's father released a statement through his lawyers the next morning. I read it on my phone while eating breakfast in the dining hall, and the desperation in the carefully worded paragraphs was obvious. The statement claimed the university was scapegoating his daughter to distract from their failure to properly investigate the original scholarship controversy. It suggested that the essay fraud charges were manufactured to protect the school's reputation after they'd cleared Professor Coleman too quickly. It even hinted at possible legal action against the university for damaging Ashley's future prospects. But the spin attempt fell completely flat, because everyone had seen the evidence. Travis had provided emails showing Ashley's father negotiating the $5,000 price for the scholarship essay. The Academic Integrity Board had reviewed 15 different papers with matching writing styles to Travis's confirmed work. There were payment records and timestamps and original files that proved beyond any doubt what she'd done. No amount of expensive lawyers or carefully crafted statements could make that evidence disappear. I watched students commenting on the statement across social media, and most of the responses were pointing out that massive wealth and family connections have limits when confronted with undeniable documentation of wrongdoing. Someone posted a comparison of Ashley's writing style in her social media posts versus the sophisticated language in her submitted essays, and the difference was so obvious that people started sharing it everywhere. Another student dug up old posts where Ashley had complained about difficult assignments, which made no sense if she was actually capable of producing the graduate-level work in her papers. The narrative her father tried to create about university conspiracy crumbled under the weight of simple facts that anyone could verify. The administration announced new policies 2 weeks later during a campus-wide meeting in the main auditorium. I sat near the back with Kamala, listening as the dean explained changes to scholarship procedures and academic integrity reporting. Major scholarships would now require review by multiple faculty members from different departments to prevent any appearance of favoritism or conflict of interest. Students who wanted to appeal scholarship decisions or report concerns would have clear procedures to follow without needing to resort to public accusations or social media campaigns. The new reporting system promised confidentiality and protection from retaliation for anyone who came forward with evidence of academic misconduct. After the meeting, Professor Coleman found me in the hallway outside the auditorium. He looked tired, but his voice was steady when he told me these changes would protect future students from what I'd gone through. No one else would have to endure weeks of defamation and false accusations because someone with money and connections decided they deserved something that was earned through merit. I felt like the nightmare I'd survived might actually prevent others from experiencing similar attacks. The policies weren't perfect, and probably wouldn't stop every entitled rich kid from trying to buy or steal what they wanted. But at least there would be proper procedures and protections instead of just hoping victims could survive social media trials by jealous accusers. I met with an academic counselor named Dr. Ramirez the following Monday to discuss how the stress had affected my coursework this semester. Her office was small but comfortable, with plants on the windowsill and framed degrees on the walls. She pulled up my grades on her computer and asked me to walk through what had happened week by week during Ashley's campaign. I explained how the constant accusations and stares had made it hard to concentrate in lectures, how I'd fallen behind on problem sets because I was too anxious to focus on physics equations, how I'd missed study group sessions because I didn't want to face people who believed the lies about me and Professor Coleman. Dr. Ramirez listened without interrupting, taking notes occasionally and nodding to show she understood. When I finished, she helped me develop a plan to catch up on assignments and prepare for finals. She arranged extensions on 2 major papers and connected me with a tutor for the material I'd missed in my quantum mechanics class. The practical support felt more valuable than sympathy or apologies. I didn't need people feeling sorry for me. I needed concrete help getting back on track academically so I could finish the semester strong and prove that Ashley's campaign hadn't derailed my success or my legitimate merit as a scholarship recipient. Dr. Ramirez also suggested I consider talking to a therapist about the emotional impact of being publicly accused and having my reputation attacked. I told her I'd think about it, which was honest because part of me wanted to just move forward and forget the whole thing happened. But another part of me knew that pretending it didn't affect me wouldn't make the memories of people staring and whispering go away. Landon published a follow-up article in the student newspaper 3 days before finals started. The headline read, "From Accusations to Expulsion, How One Student's Lies Unraveled into Academic Fraud Scandal," and the piece carefully connected all the dots between Ashley's fabricated story about me and her own extensive cheating. He noted that the investigation into Professor Coleman had found no evidence of any inappropriate relationship, and that Ashley's previous accusations had been baseless attempts to explain why she'd lost the scholarship to a more qualified candidate. The article included quotes from the Academic Integrity Board about the scale of essay fraud they'd uncovered, and mentioned that similar cases might exist with other wealthy students who'd used the same ghostwriting service. Landon had interviewed Travis with his permission, and the ghostwriter explained how he'd kept copies of everything, because he knew rich kids would eventually try to claim his work as their own, or refuse to pay him. The piece ended by examining how privilege and entitlement can lead people to believe rules don't apply to them, and how Ashley's downfall showed that evidence and proper procedures could overcome even significant family wealth and connections. I watched the narrative shift completely as students who'd believed Ashley's lies now understood they'd been manipulated by someone with no credibility or integrity. Comments on the article ranged from people apologizing for doubting me to others expressing anger that Ashley had wasted everyone's time with false accusations while being a massive fraud herself. Someone posted that they'd always known something was off about how Ashley wrote compared to how she spoke, and multiple people agreed they'd noticed the same inconsistency, but hadn't wanted to accuse someone with such a powerful family. Professor Coleman called me into his office the day after Landon's article published. I knocked on the door that had been photographed and analyzed and turned into evidence of something disgusting that never happened, and he welcomed me in with a warm smile. His office looked the same as always, with physics textbooks lining the shelves and papers scattered across his desk in organized chaos. He gestured for me to sit in the chair across from him, and then said something that made my throat tight with emotion. He wanted me to join his research team for next semester. He explained that my handling of the crisis had shown the kind of character and resilience he wanted in students he mentored, and that he'd been impressed by how I'd followed proper procedures, even when it would have been easier to fight back inappropriately on social media. The research position would involve working on quantum computing applications and could lead to published papers if our results were significant. It was exactly what I'd hoped for when I'd applied to this university, the kind of opportunity that would help me get into top graduate programs and build a real career in physics. I thanked him with a voice that shook slightly because his faith in me had never wavered, despite Ashley's attempts to destroy both our reputations with her entitled jealousy and manufactured scandal. He handed me information about the research project and told me to review it over winter break so I'd be ready to start when spring semester began. As I left his office, I realized that Ashley's attack had somehow led to me getting an even better opportunity than I'd had before, which felt like the universe correcting itself after weeks of injustice. I ran into one of Ashley's former friends in the library later that week while I was studying for my physics final. She was a girl named Rebecca who'd been part of Ashley's social circle, always dressed in expensive clothes and carrying designer bags. She approached my table hesitantly, glancing around like she didn't want to be seen talking to me. When she sat down across from me, she spoke quietly and quickly, apologizing for not speaking up when the accusations first started spreading. She explained that Ashley's friend group had been afraid of her social power and family connections, worried that crossing her would mean being cut off from parties and networking opportunities their parents valued. Rebecca said she'd suspected the essay fraud for months after noticing how differently Ashley wrote in group chat messages compared to her submitted papers. But speaking up had seemed too risky when Ashley's family had so much influence on campus. I listened without interrupting, watching Rebecca struggle with guilt over her silence. When she finished, I told her I understood how privilege creates silence around it, how wealth and power make people afraid to challenge wrongdoing even when they know it's happening. Rebecca looked relieved that I wasn't angry at her, though part of me was frustrated that more people hadn't found the courage to tell the truth earlier. But I also recognized that not everyone could afford to risk their social standing or family connections the way I had, since I'd never had those things to lose in the first place. Rebecca promised to be more courageous next time she saw injustice, and I hoped she meant it. My parents called that evening while I was taking a break from studying. Mom's voice was thick with emotion as she told me how proud she was of how I'd handled everything with dignity and proper procedures. Dad added that they'd always known I had the strength to get through difficult situations, but they were still amazed by how I'd stayed focused on doing the right thing instead of giving in to anger or despair. Then Mom admitted something that made my chest ache. She said she'd been terrified I would lose the scholarship and have to leave school, that they'd been lying awake at night trying to figure out how they could possibly afford tuition if the committee believed Ashley's lies. Hearing the fear in her voice reminded me how much had been at stake beyond just my reputation. My entire future had hung in the balance while Ashley played her cruel games, and my family had been suffering right alongside me even though they'd tried to stay strong and supportive. I told them I loved them, and thanked them for never doubting me, for believing in my integrity even when half the campus thought I was a liar who'd slept with a professor. Dad's voice cracked when he said they'd always believe in me because they knew the person they'd raised, and that no amount of lies from rich kids could change that. We talked for another hour about finals and winter break plans and normal family things that felt precious after weeks of crisis. When we hung up, I felt grateful that I'd trusted the system enough to present evidence through official channels, instead of giving up or fighting back in ways that would have made my parents ashamed. The scholarship committee sent a formal letter the next day, arriving in my campus mailbox on official university letterhead. I opened it standing in the mailroom, my hands shaking slightly as I unfolded the thick paper. The letter confirmed my award for all 4 years, and noted that my academic performance and character had exceeded their expectations. They wrote that the false accusations I'd faced had only demonstrated the strength of my integrity and commitment to proper procedures, and that they were confident in their decision to invest in my education. The committee chair had signed the letter personally, adding a handwritten note at the bottom, thanking me for upholding the values the scholarship was meant to recognize. I read the letter 3 times, letting the words sink in, and feeling the security of knowing my education was funded without ongoing controversy. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for weeks finally lifted, replaced by the freedom to think about my future goals instead of constantly defending my past achievements from someone else's lies and manipulation. I took a photo of the letter and sent it to my parents, then to Kamala, then carefully filed it in my desk drawer where I could look at it whenever I needed to remember that truth, and evidence had prevailed over privilege and false accusations. Finals week arrived with the same stress and exhaustion it brought every semester, but this time the pressure felt normal instead of overwhelming. I threw myself into studying with renewed focus, determined to maintain my GPA and prove I'd earned this scholarship through actual merit. Kamala and I set up camp in the library, spreading our textbooks and notes across a table in the quiet section. She quizzed me on physics equations while I helped her work through chemistry problems, and we took breaks to get coffee and complain about professors who scheduled exams too close together. Other students joined our study group, people who'd kept their distance during the scandal, but now treated me normally again. We worked through practice problems and compared notes and stressed about grade curves together, like regular college students facing finals. The normal rhythms of college life felt like a gift after weeks of scandal and stress, and I savored every moment of boring academic pressure that had nothing to do with false accusations or wealthy enemies. When I finally closed my quantum mechanics textbook at 2 a.m. before my last exam, Kamala looked up from her chemistry notes and smiled. She said she was proud of me for getting through everything and still managing to probably ace all my finals. I smiled back and told her I couldn't have done it without her steady friendship, and she waved off the compliment, but I could tell she was pleased. We packed up our things and walked back to our dorm through the cold December night, talking about winter break plans, and looking forward to a semester that would hopefully be defined by actual academics, instead of drama manufactured by jealous rich kids who'd never earned anything honestly in their entitled lives. My physics final sat in front of me with 3 hours to prove everything I'd fought for. I worked through the quantum mechanics problems methodically, showing every calculation and explaining each step like Professor Coleman had taught me. The equations flowed naturally after weeks of studying despite the scandal trying to destroy my focus. When I reached the last problem about wave functions, I double-checked my work and felt confident I'd gotten it right. I handed in my exam and walked out of the lecture hall knowing I'd done my best. 3 days later, I picked up my graded final from Professor Coleman's office. He'd written, "Excellent work, proud of you," across the top in his careful handwriting, and seeing those words made my throat tight. The simple encouragement meant everything after he'd stood by me during the investigation when Ashley tried to destroy both our reputations. I looked at the A+ and realized the relationships I'd built with faculty through genuine academic effort were the opposite of what Ashley accused me of. They were based on mutual respect and shared intellectual curiosity, not the disgusting lies she'd invented because she couldn't accept losing to someone who actually earned their achievements. The semester ended with my final grades posted online, my GPA intact at 4.0. Ashley's campaign hadn't destroyed my academic performance despite the enormous stress and distraction of defending myself from false accusations for weeks. I packed up my dorm room for winter break, folding clothes and boxing up textbooks while Kamala played music and talked about her holiday plans. I felt exhausted but victorious, knowing I'd survived an attack on my character and reputation by someone with far more money and power. The experience had made me stronger and more confident in my own integrity, teaching me that truth supported by evidence could prevail even against privilege and lies. My parents picked me up in their old car, and my mom hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. The 3-hour drive home felt peaceful after months of campus stress. I watched familiar highways pass by and let myself relax for the first time since Ashley's article destroyed my reputation. At home, I slept in my old bed and helped my mom cook dinner and played video games with my younger sister. Being normal felt like a luxury I'd forgotten existed. On the 3rd day of break, I checked my email and found a message from a student I barely knew. She thanked me for exposing Ashley's fraud because she'd suspected cheating, but was afraid to report it. Reading her words reminded me that speaking up helps more than just yourself, that staying silent to avoid conflict allows people like Ashley to continue harming others. My decision to present evidence to the dean instead of just protecting myself had made a difference for other students who'd been scared to challenge someone with family money and connections. The message made my experience feel more meaningful, like the nightmare had served a purpose beyond just clearing my name. I spent the rest of break sleeping late and helping my mom cook and just being normal for the first time in months. My younger sister asked about the scandal one night while we were washing dishes, and I explained that sometimes doing the right thing is harder than fighting dirty. I told her that you have to live with yourself and build a life based on truth rather than lies, and that shortcuts always catch up with you eventually. She listened carefully and said she understood, and I hoped she'd remember that lesson when she faced her own challenges. Winter break passed quickly, and I drove back to campus with mixed feelings about returning to the place where Ashley had tried to destroy me. But when spring semester started and I walked into my first class, nobody stared or whispered. The absence of negative attention felt like freedom, and I realized my reputation had been restored not through dramatic vindication, but through the quiet accumulation of truth and evidence that eventually overwhelmed Ashley's lies. Students treated me normally again, asking to borrow pens and comparing notes on assignments like nothing had happened. The return to ordinary college life felt like a gift I'd never take for granted. Professor Coleman started the semester by announcing his research team's project on quantum computing applications. I listened to him explain the methodology and felt genuine excitement about working on actual physics, instead of defending myself from false accusations. The return to normal academic challenges felt like reclaiming the college experience I came here for, and I was determined to make the most of opportunities I'd almost lost to someone else's jealousy. After class, I approached Professor Coleman to ask about joining the research team, and he smiled and said he'd been hoping I would volunteer. Later that week, Landon found me in the library and told me he'd won a journalism award for his coverage of the scholarship controversy and academic fraud case. He said my willingness to tell the truth on the record made the story possible, that most people would have stayed silent rather than risk more attention. I felt glad something positive came from the nightmare, and I appreciated that he'd treated me like a source deserving respect rather than a scandal to exploit for clicks like Ashley did with her hit piece. He showed me the award certificate and thanked me again for trusting him to tell the story fairly. The scholarship office sent me an email in February asking if I'd speak to incoming scholarship recipients about handling pressure and maintaining integrity. I accepted because I wanted them to know that merit-based awards are worth defending, that they shouldn't let anyone make them feel ashamed of achievements they earned honestly. During the talk, I stood in front of 20 nervous freshmen and emphasized following proper procedures when facing false accusations. I explained that truth supported by evidence will eventually prevail over lies amplified by privilege and social media, even when the process feels slow and unfair. I told them to document everything, report through official channels, and trust that institutions can act justly when presented with undeniable proof. After the talk, a student approached me with tears in her eyes. She said she was dealing with a wealthy classmate who'd been spreading rumors about her, claiming she only got into the honors program through connections. I walked her through the steps of documenting everything and reporting through official channels, explaining exactly what I'd done when Ashley attacked me. I told her not to respond publicly or give up in despair, that following proper procedures might feel pointless, but it creates a record that matters when things escalate. Helping her avoid the mistakes I almost made gave my experience value beyond just my own story, and I realized that surviving Ashley's attack had taught me lessons I could share with others facing similar situations. The next week, Professor Coleman stopped me after class to share something interesting. He said applications for the scholarship I won had increased this year because the controversy actually raised awareness of the program and its legitimate merit-based selection. Students who'd never heard of the scholarship before had applied after reading about the investigation and Ashley's fraud case, wanting to prove they could earn something through actual academic achievement. The irony made me laugh, that Ashley's attack ended up promoting the very thing she tried to destroy. I was learning that sometimes the best revenge is simply continuing to succeed and thrive despite someone else's attempts to tear you down, that living well really does matter more than any dramatic confrontation or public vindication. I found the student organization through a flyer posted in the physics building about helping first-generation students navigate academic systems. The meeting was in a basement classroom with about 15 students sitting in a circle, and when I introduced myself, someone said they'd heard about the scholarship controversy and asked how I'd handled it. I explained that following proper procedures felt slow and frustrating, but created a record that mattered when things escalated, and that documenting everything helped prove the truth when someone with money and connections tried to destroy my reputation. The group was working on policy recommendations for the university about academic integrity and support systems, and they asked if I'd help draft guidelines for reporting misconduct without fear of retaliation. Working on something bigger than just my own situation felt meaningful in a way I hadn't expected, like Ashley's attack had accidentally given me purpose beyond personal success. I started attending weekly meetings and helping other first-generation students understand how to access resources and advocate for themselves, and I realized that surviving false accusations had taught me lessons worth sharing with people facing similar challenges from privileged students who believed money should determine everything. Kamala and I moved into a nicer dorm at the start of the new semester, a double room with actual closet space and windows that opened. She brought posters and string lights while I carried boxes of books, and we spent an afternoon decorating and arranging furniture until the room felt like ours. She joked that we'd earned an upgrade after surviving last semester's drama, and I laughed because it was true in more ways than one. We made plans for the semester over pizza, talking about classes and research opportunities and normal college things that felt precious after months when I wasn't sure who I could trust besides her. She'd stood by me when other people kept their distance to avoid being associated with the scandal, and having a friend who never doubted me made the whole nightmare feel survivable. We stayed up late that first night in the new room talking about nothing important, and the simple pleasure of normal friendship reminded me that not everything had been destroyed by Ashley's lies. The email from the dean's office arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was eating breakfast in the dining hall. I opened it expecting routine administrative information, and instead found notice that Ashley's appeal of her expulsion had been denied, and she was permanently banned from campus. The finality of the consequence surprised me, because I'd half expected her family's money and connections to somehow reduce the punishment, maybe turn expulsion into suspension, or academic probation with conditions. But the email was clear that the Academic Integrity Board had reviewed extensive evidence of fraud spanning 3 years, and found the violations too serious to allow any lesser sanction. I showed Kamala the message, and she said it was about time someone with wealth and privilege faced real consequences for cheating. And I realized I was learning that documented evidence of extensive fraud is hard to overcome even with lawyers and family donations. Ashley was gone for good, unable to return or finish her degree at this university, and the scholarship she'd tried to steal from me through lies would never be hers. Professor Coleman stopped me after class the following week to say he wanted to introduce me to colleagues at other universities who might be good advisors for graduate school. He pulled up his email and showed me messages he'd already sent to physics professors at 3 different schools, describing my research potential and academic achievements in terms that made me sound far more impressive than I felt. I started researching physics PhD programs that evening, reading about different specializations and faculty research interests with real excitement about my future. The mentorship I was receiving was exactly what Ashley had accused me of obtaining inappropriately, except it was based on actual academic achievement and mutual respect, rather than the disgusting scenario she'd invented. Professor Coleman was helping me because I'd earned it through hard work and demonstrated ability, not because of anything inappropriate or unethical. I sent applications to graduate programs over the next month, and each one felt like proof that her attempts to destroy my academic future had failed completely. My parents visited campus for Parents' Weekend in October, and I gave them a tour of the physics building and introduced them to Professor Coleman in his office. He shook their hands and told them how proud they should be of my character and resilience, that I'd faced false accusations with integrity and emerged stronger. My mom started crying while thanking him for supporting me through the investigation, and I watched her wipe tears while he explained that he'd never doubted my honesty or work ethic. My dad asked questions about graduate school and research opportunities, clearly relieved that the scandal hadn't derailed my plans, and Professor Coleman assured them I had excellent prospects for funded PhD programs. We had lunch together in the student center, and my parents kept saying how glad they were that I'd trusted proper procedures instead of giving up or fighting back inappropriately. The weekend reminded me that the people who mattered most had never doubted me, even when it felt like the whole campus believed Ashley's lies about sleeping my way to a scholarship I'd actually earned through perfect grades and test scores. The university announced a new reporting system the following month through a campus-wide email from the administration. Students could now raise concerns about misconduct through a confidential online portal that protected them from retaliation and public exposure, directly addressing the problems that arose from Ashley's social media campaign against me. The email credited recent cases with highlighting the need for better procedures, and I knew they meant my situation, even though they didn't name anyone specifically. Ingrid Melton from the University Council's office sent me a separate message thanking me for handling the situation through proper channels, and noting that institutional change had emerged from my decision to present evidence to the dean, despite how slow and frustrating the process felt. I was proud that something positive came from the nightmare, that future students wouldn't have to endure public defamation while waiting for investigations to clear their names. The new system wasn't perfect, but it was better than what existed before, and I'd helped make it happen by refusing to sink to Ashley's level of social media attacks. Professor Coleman called me into his office in late November to tell me I'd been selected for a competitive summer research position in his lab. The position came with a stipend that would cover my living expenses, and the chance to contribute to published work in a respected physics journal. I'd be working on quantum mechanics experiments that could lead to my own paper if the results were significant, and the opportunity represented everything I'd hoped to achieve in college. He explained that the selection committee had reviewed applications from dozens of students and chosen me based on my academic record and research potential, making it clear this was another thing I'd earned through merit, rather than anything inappropriate. I thanked him and left his office feeling grateful that Ashley's attempts to destroy my academic future had failed. So completely. Leaving me with even more opportunities than I'd had before, she launched her malicious campaign out of jealousy over losing a scholarship to someone without money or family connections. Landon graduated in December and got hired by a major newspaper in the city, and he messaged me to share the news. He said covering the scholarship controversy had taught him important lessons about verifying sources and the difference between journalism and gossip, that he'd learned to check facts carefully instead of just publishing accusations because they were sensational. I congratulated him and said I was glad something educational came from the situation, even though I wished none of it had been necessary in the first place. He replied that watching how I handled false accusations with dignity and proper procedures had influenced his approach to journalism, and I realized that multiple people had learned and grown from what happened. I just wished Ashley had accepted that sometimes other people earn things through merit rather than money, that not everything can be bought or inherited through family connections and donations. As the academic year ended, I sat in my dorm room studying for finals and thought about how much I'd grown from facing false accusations. The scholarship that started this whole mess had given me not just financial security, but confidence in my own integrity, and the knowledge that truth supported by evidence is more powerful than lies amplified by privilege and social media platforms. I'd learned to trust proper procedures even when they felt slow and inadequate, to document everything carefully, and to resist the temptation to fight dirty when someone attacks your character. The investigation had cleared me and Professor Coleman completely. Ashley had been expelled for extensive fraud, and I was moving forward with research opportunities and graduate school plans that proved her lies hadn't destroyed anything that mattered. I finished my last final exam with my GPA still at 4.0, walked out of the classroom into bright sunshine, and felt ready for whatever came next. Professor Coleman made an announcement during the final department meeting that he would retire at the end of next year after 41 years of teaching. Several faculty members looked surprised and disappointed, but he explained that he wanted to leave while he still loved the work, rather than staying too long out of obligation. After the meeting ended, he asked me to stay behind and said he wanted me to help mentor the incoming scholarship recipients, who would work with his successor. The trust he was placing in me felt like the ultimate vindication, not just clearing my name but being recognized as someone whose character and judgment were worth copying. He said I'd shown exactly the kind of integrity and resilience the program wanted to develop in students, and he knew I could help guide others facing similar challenges from privileged students who believed merit didn't matter as much as money and connections. I agreed to take on the mentoring role, thinking about how far I'd come from that morning. When Ashley held up a newspaper calling me a bedroom scholar and accused me of sleeping with a 70-year-old professor for a scholarship I'd earned through 4 years of perfect grades and endless hard work, the research lab became my world that summer. I spent long days calibrating equipment, running tests on quantum particle behavior, and analyzing data sets that stretched across multiple computer screens. The work demanded my full attention in a way that felt good after months of defending myself instead of doing actual science. My colleagues treated me like any other researcher, asking about my methodology and discussing results over lunch without once mentioning the scandal that had consumed my spring semester. Professor Coleman stopped by most afternoons to check my progress, and we'd spend hours debating interpretations of the data or troubleshooting experimental problems, which was exactly the kind of mentoring relationship Ashley had tried to twist into something horrible. By mid-July, our results showed a pattern that Professor Coleman said was significant enough to publish. I started drafting the paper, writing and rewriting sections until my academic voice felt confident instead of defensive. The tangible proof of my abilities sat there in graphs and equations that no one could dispute or claim I'd faked. Writing up legitimate scientific findings felt more satisfying than any apology from people who'd believed the lies, and I realized the best response to false accusations was simply continuing to excel at exactly what you'd been accused of faking. When August arrived, I received an email from the scholarship committee asking if I'd join them in selecting next year's recipients. They wanted to ensure the process stayed merit-based and protected applicants from attacks like the one I'd faced. The invitation felt like closing a circle, moving from defending my own award to helping other deserving students receive theirs, without fear of jealous rich kids who believed money should determine everything. I accepted immediately and spent a week reviewing applications, looking for genuine achievement and potential, rather than family connections or donation amounts. Senior year started with me carrying a research portfolio that proved my scientific abilities, mentoring relationships with faculty built on mutual respect, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd handled an impossible situation with integrity instead of revenge. The scholarship that Ashley tried to steal through lies and privilege had funded not just my education, but my growth into someone who understood that real merit couldn't be faked or bought. And that truth supported by solid evidence would eventually win over even the nastiest attacks from people who'd never honestly earned anything in their entire lives.